Thanks for joining us for our Hope in the Dark series. My name is Allison, and I'm getting to interview a good friend of mine, Garrett Cohn. So, Garrett, thank you for being here today. We're glad to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so Garrett and I have known each other for, 5 years. I should have done the math ahead of
Yeah.
time. But it's been a joy to get to know him and excited to look at your story a little bit. So I've had the honor of hearing your full story, but would you share with us a little bit about the story you're sharing today and what that journey has looked like?
Yeah. Well, my name's Garrett Cohn, and I have the honor, I guess. It's kind of weird to think about. Like, this is actually the first time I'm really sharing this part of my story.
That's big.
I struggled with anorexia and bulimia and an eating disorder for, about 25 years. Yeah.
It's a big statement to say, you said for the first time.
Yeah, it really is. It's, now that I think about it.
Well, we are honored to get to share it, right? And I know you have a reason and a why for wanting to share today. So would you share a little bit about what that journey, that struggle has looked like, just to help people understand? They may not understand. They may not naturally think of you when they think of anorexia or bulimia.
Yeah, most people, when they think about eating disorders, they have maybe a certain stereotype in their head, and maybe um, like a young female or something like that. But the reality is, eating disorders are, I would say, in America, the culturally acceptable struggle. It's something that I think a lot more people struggle with than they want to admit. For me, where it stemmed was when I was younger, I had very low self-esteem, and I also had very high drive. So like perfectionism and things that were had to be really, really good. And so I had to make sure that I was, getting the best grades, that I had a lot of friends, that I was excelling in sports, that I was doing all these different things. And it never really felt like I was ever good enough. And when I was in my early teens, my parents divorced, and that time was, um, it was just foundationally shaking for me. And I remember during that time I was actually experiencing a lot of bullying at school, and there were a lot of people who specifically were picking on my weight. And when you're in middle school, kind of going through those awkward phases of puberty and changes and everything, and people were they were pretty mean. And so that fed into this lie that I had in my head that acceptance had to come through the way that I looked and the way that people saw me. And that's something that slowly birthed into early behaviors. It started with like skipping a meal here, skipping a meal there, to then a long season of purging. And it was, something that I would say I thought I was just supposed to deal with it. Especially, I came to faith when I was 15, and I didn't know how to talk about this. It felt like what I was learning was, if you struggle with something, then especially something like this that happens behind the scenes where nobody really knows, or frankly, if there's people that just don't really care and they're like, okay, he's just going through body changes or whatever. I never felt like I could really share. It felt like silence was my only option, my only real way of coping with it. And so, it was, I would say suffering in silence was absolute hell. That's what it felt like, just complete isolation and separation from community, separation from that opportunity for healing. It was very painful.
Mm. Well, thank you for sharing. It was interesting how all the little parts of our lives, right? Like talked about performance or achievement, like things that we want our kids to achieve and perform and do well in life. But man, all those things can add up and really become a recipe for some coping in ways that or harmful for us. And how did you know, when skipping a meal, right, is one thing.
Right.
How did you know? What was the transition point where you realized, there's something's taken root here?
Right. I think, we all have different stressors and things that happen in our life. I mean, that's just part of life.
Yeah.
And it's the way that we cope with those things that we are doing it for a reason. And for me, skipping a meal or purging after a meal, that became such a physical release and relief that I knew was maladaptive, that was not helpful. But when I was weighing the benefits versus, the, I guess, opportunities for hurting me, like I was thinking that it was so much more worth it. And so it didn't happen overnight. I remember late high school, I I really began to recognize that it wasn't enough, that skipping one meal wasn't enough.
Okay,
That
sort of needing more than just like
Yeah.
one meal skip.
There was never the sense of satisfaction. The eating disorder was thriving on the secrecy, was thriving on that the internal parts of me. I was thriving on that, the dopamine hit, the release, and those things. Ultimately, I remember, the first time that I felt dizzy and fainted, the first time that I, yeah, there's just so many different firsts that come up to my mind. And as I was continuing to go through college and to go through my early time when I was beginning my career in ministry and all these different things, I was like, this is not something that I'm able to control. I felt out of control with it. I felt that if I was to stop, I wouldn't even say that stopping was an option. I wanted to. And I remember talking to some people. I had some people that I worked with that I was trusting to kind of help me navigate this. And I just remember sitting in my boss's office and telling him for the first time that I was struggling with an eating disorder. And I remember the response was, "You don't need that crap. Just stop." And I kind of feel like that's what a lot of our culture says, especially when you think about guys who have eating disorders. There's not a lot of people that look like me that share this story. Um, and I remember those conversations where it was just like, well, if you don't like the way you look, then just go on a diet or just exercise more. Or when I was when I was losing way too much weight too fast, just eat something. It's not that simple. Um, the kind of way I like to talk about it is a lot of people think that an eating disorder is kind of like a waffle, where every part of the waffle is like segmented and different things are impacted in different ways, but most of the time they don't touch. Where I think my eating disorder for me was like the broth of a soup, that it impacted every aspect of my life. And it got to me to be a point where I wasn't able to go hours without acting on the thoughts that were happening minute by minute.
And so you mentioned that you have been in ministry. You've been in ministry for over a decade. You've been following Jesus for longer than that. I've known you. You're an avid Christ follower. And also recognizing that it's not just the world that can make it hard when we're struggling with something in private. Sometimes it's Christians. And as two Christ followers right here, we grieve that. We want to get it right and be there for people. And so what was that like, struggling as a Christian with this? And what would you hope that could look like too?
There's so many expectations. It's I early on, especially with perfectionistic tendencies and achiever mentality, it's like I love Jesus so much, and especially early on, I kind of learned some bad theology that was saying, in order to be a good Christ follower, thinking even with those words, I have to do X, Y, Z,
Yeah.
and I need to make sure that I'm waking up before dawn to read my Bible and to pray, and that I guess for me, the biggest struggle was trying to come to grips with, is my eating disorder sin? Is it not? Um, because it felt like something that I wanted so badly to not be a part of my life. I prayed so many prayers, had so many moments of intimacy with God where I'm just saying, God, please take this. I don't want this. Um, I don't understand why this is part of my story. Frankly, I knew and I do know that God, He doesn't mind our doubts. He doesn't mind our questions. I think He loves it when we come to Him with those. I think for me, what I was struggling with is if I feel like God, I'm being real and honest and open with you. And when I'm going to your people and being honest and real and open, they're the ones who are more condemning. I don't understand this. And so that fed into this mentality of I need to be quiet. And so I had a lot of different moments with that. Um, I remember the first time I shared it with you. And I was new on the job here. I had no idea. I had no idea how you were going to respond. And that became something that I think for the first time I experienced someone who didn't meet me and want to fix things immediately. Yes, you wanted to help, but I think first and foremost, you wanted to honor the, I guess, vulnerability that I was showing at that point in time. And I think that conversation was one of the earliest moments on my path to healing, my path to seeing God just take this story and uh, bring beauty from the ashes that I felt like I was experiencing.
It was an honor to receive it then and to be a part of it now, getting to walk and follow Jesus together with people is one of God's greatest gifts. And I affirm what you said, right? Questions and doubts, like God can handle those. And I think the greatest choice is doing them with other people, right? Which is what you courageously started to do. So tell me a little bit about what it was like when you chose to get help and you chose to move towards healing in this thing that had become such a secret in your life.
Yeah, things really came to a head. My mental health we were going through an extremely challenging season in ministry, at home. There were so many different things going on. And um, I had started seeing a phenomenal therapist who, golly, God's used her in such a phenomenal way, and I'm so grateful for her. And she connected me with somebody who specialized in eating disorders. And from there, I started learning a lot more. I knew what I was doing to my body, but I didn't understand what was actually happening. And I remember it's for me and my eating disorder, and it's different for everybody. So it's not something that you can say is across the board, but for me, it was this unquenchable like desire to feel empty. Um, I never liked feeling fullness physically. Anytime I did, it was discomfort, and I felt like I had to get rid of whatever was in me. And so what that does nutritionally is absolutely terrible to your body. I didn't realize it. Uh, there were a lot of times where my body would fluctuate. People would look at me and some would be like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" And then there were other times where they're like, "Oh, yeah, like this is great, whatever." And so it's the culture of celebrating diets and a certain body standard and everything. But for me, I remember the first time I was like, it's not right. I was driving with my kids, and we were driving down the road, and I had a moment where I was driving. Next thing I know, I'm feeling the bumps on the side of the road because I had just completely blanked. And I thought about my son in the back, and I was like, it's one thing for it to affect me. It's another thing for it to affect my kids. And there are people who knew a lot about my story. Amy knew that I struggled, my wife, and at the same time, she didn't know the fullness of what I was dealing with. Nobody really knew the fullness. You didn't even know the fullness. And when I started sharing with the specialist who was helping me, she was, doing all these medical tests and helping me to see that my body was fastly approaching a moment of absolute I could have died. And just to think about that, I had had a conversation with her, and she had been asking me, what would it look like for you to get extra support? I was like, well, what does that mean? And she was telling me, what would it look like for you to maybe pursue treatment, going into treatment? I was like, that's not an option. No way. Like, I can't stop my life. I've got responsibilities. I have, like, what would even happen? What would this look like? And so I completely dismissed that. And then a couple months go by, and my body's continuing to deteriorate. And finally it got to the point where the numbers from all my tests were so critical that they said, Garrett, you need to understand that this is not like one of those situations where you can always see it coming. For me, I could have been one purging moment from that being my last breath, because heart failure is very easily associated with that. And she was like, I know you're thinking a lot about your kids and a lot about your family, about providing for them, but how are they going to do that if you're not here? That woke me up, and I realized I couldn't do anything about it. So I decided, I was like, I've got to do something. I called Amy, and I told her what was going on. And she was shocked. She didn't understand the fullness of what I was going through. And she spoke with the specialist who told her, and I won't forget the look on her face of just like, she had no idea what I was walking through, and she thought she understood, and I think a lot of people think they understood. Until you go through something like that, where you realize that, yeah,
It's heavy. Sounds like you have
yeah.
a good team and a great wife, and they were able to help you take some next steps. But that heaviness of what you just described is.
So I ended up going to pastors at the church I was serving at, and expecting rebuke and expecting disappointment. And I was met with love and care and concern for me, concern for my family, and just saying, you got to do what's best for you, and we're going to be here to support you. Wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for that at all. And so I'll never forget it. March 24th of 2022, I walked into Eating Recovery Center here in the Dallas area, and golly, that was the hardest first step. But I believe I wouldn't be here if I didn't do that. Yeah.
Well, it's a big day. It sounds like a date you'll never forget. The day you chose to fight back to all of these things that were drastically impacting your life. So it's a day to be proud of, a day to celebrate. I remember you telling me, and there was nothing but like, you're brave and you're courageous for getting help. A lot of people suffer in silence, especially when they don't fit the stereotype, or it's not easy to speak up. But you did, and I think there's nothing but respect for what you've done.
Thank you.
And obviously faith has continued to be a part of that journey, and you look at people who've experienced what you've experienced, and it's easy to want to give up on God or give up on the church, and yet we're here having this conversation.
Yeah, I know.
So how did you not give up
Oh,
on
gosh.
God or the church? Like, how are you here?
So I was in treatment, like formalized treatment, for over a year. And in that time between, there's so many things you take for granted. I remember my first meal in there, I'm looking, and we had just done so many different things that feel like intrusive. It's like you lose opportunities to do basic things. I couldn't go to the bathroom without somebody making sure and checking before and afterwards. I'm like, what in the world? This is not what I signed up for. But I remember sitting and having my first meal and being so terrified of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, something I had had hundreds of times before. And I'm sitting here thinking, how in the world does this piece of food have so much power over me? God, why can't I deal with this? And frankly, the time that I spent in treatment were some of the rawest moments of my time with God. And I think that I had preached and taught students and other people how God wants to meet us exactly where we are. We don't have to have any flowery language. Like, there's nothing too big for him to say, oh, sorry, I'm done with you. Like, his love is that great. And I was like, fine, I know I believe this, and it's time for me to actually put this into practice. That time I felt like I was stripped of so much. I had questions about basic things, like when you already have questions about your identity and getting wrapped up with, the way you look or the way that you perform or the way that people see you, that's one thing. But I started questioning my marriage. I started questioning my role in ministry. I was questioning so many basic things, friendships and relationships, and I felt like I didn't know what was up from down, what was right from left. I had no idea. And I found myself, I was isolating. I was doing whatever I thought I could to cope. And that looked like pushing a lot of people away. And I realized when you lose one coping, one coping strategy, one coping skill, whether it's helpful or harmful, we are at a baseline created to try and deal with conflict, deal with the uncertainty any different way. And for me, I trusted God and I felt so confident in Him, but I didn't have that for His people. And so it was a slow process for me to allow my team in treatment to actually be able to help me. I remember this one time I was so cynical. I was so like, I'm going through all these things. And I remember looking at one of my doctors and I'm saying, I've heard every session of therapy and classes that we were doing and groups where we're processing. I've heard everything. And I recognize that this is good and this may be helpful for other people. It's not going to work for me. I just told him that. Yeah, I was like, this is not going to work for me. And one of my doctors looked at me and she said, Garrett, I've sat where you've sat. And I know that it feels like this isn't going to work for you. And I can tell you on today that even though I felt like that and said those words, I know that it does work because of where I am today. And at the time, I was like, yeah, but that's you. That's you.
Now
This
you
is,
work here,
yeah,
so you.
this isn't me. But slowly but surely, as I think God showed me the beauty of vulnerability, not coming with this expectation and all dressed up language or anything like that, but just the rawness of here's where I am, Lord, and I have the choice to whether to show that or to not. Golly, if you were to read my journal around that time, it's pretty real. But I'm really thankful because God, He put people in my life that would kind of call me on my stuff. It's like, okay, we know you're giving the sugar-coated answer. We're not going to take that right now. And that's when it started. God used some unlikely people that don't have a relationship with him, people that do and look completely different or maybe have completely different ideologies. I mean, it's amazing how he uses people that he uses to kind of wake us up and to do that. But that's God. Like that's who he is. Yeah, I mean, it would be boring if he just used the people that should, be used. I think I really leaned into the process. It was around Christmas time in 2022. And I remember when you have to celebrate Christmas on the floor of a treatment center with your kids and your wife, it's pretty humbling. Um, I I remember there was a time before we were on a retreat and with students, and they start singing this song, "See a Victory," and as it starts off, I hear the songs, and I love music. I've been a musician for a long time, um, and the line starts, "The weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper." Um, and in my life, I had felt that weapon so strong, and I felt like it was winning. And I remember, God, I do believe, as hard as it is right now, I do believe that I'm going to see a victory in this. And today I can sit here and say that I have. Like, I can sit here and say that the same way that my doctor told me, I've sat where you've sat, and I do believe it's going to work for you. I didn't believe it at all, and yet today I can say it has.
Praise God for that.
Amen.
And that's hope to everyone listening, right? Yeah. You put some of those things into practice of full vulnerability, a little bit of a low moment in life, but leaning in, giving it to God, letting unlikely people step in. And now you get to share that you've seen God be victorious. It's incredible. And thank you for sharing today your story. Any final thing just you'd want to share to someone else who may be struggling? Just a final thought?
I think it's so important to recognize that there is power in vulnerability. A lot of times I thought that weakness was acknowledging my weakness, and it was when I really acknowledged my weakness that I was able to see the strength that it actually takes for that. And so if you're struggling, you're not alone. Please know that you're not alone, and it may not feel worth it. And you may be saying, this may work for you, Garrett, but it won't work for me. And on this side of of the table, I want you to recognize that I see you, people see you, we hear you, and I believe that because you're not alone, because you have this opportunity, there truly is hope. And I believe that God's love for you is not lessened or greater based upon what you see on a scale, what you see in a mirror. I believe that the love He has for you is bigger than the illness that you're experiencing. I believe that God's love for you is so great that He is just inviting you to say, trust me. And maybe that moment of vulnerability is the first step that will help you see that victory.
Amen. I feel like you just prayed for people, and may it be so. May it be so.